lined up on the screen here, it feels like we're sitting in a circle. And I think what I love and why I accepted this invitation immediately was the way that you frame the Global Dialogue Lab to feel like a circle of experimentation and co-discovery. So I'd love it if actually this is what I tuned into as I was reflecting on our conversation today, is if we could all begin, even those who are now offline and will be joining us in the dialogue later, to just take a moment in silence to think, just already when just the word power, if we were to spend a moment reflecting on the word power, what comes up? Is it something comfortable, exciting, positive, frightening, challenging, confusing? So just power, what comes up? And if we take one moment on that, and then if we could take another moment together to reflect on what comes up when we really absorb the question. Is that okay if we do that? And before we leap in, yeah, that would be just lovely. And then that all of us, we'll start with the three of us, but just hold with, stay with what comes up. Also inform and enrich the discussion we'll have together and the discussion that will be had in the breakout groups. Just power. And maybe each one of us just says it in the different ways and sees, where does it land in us? Where do we feel it? Where is there excitement and where is there fear? What is our first association with the word power? Where did it begin in each of our lives? The journey with power. Was it a struggle? Was it a ride? Was it flow? Fear? Power. 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 Even maybe all of us just try silently or aloud saying the word in different ways to see, just changing the way we say it, the way we hear it, affect how we feel about it, what it reminds us of. Power. Does it feel like a good word or a bad word? And into that very deep contemplative space, if we bring in the question that fell into us, really, Elizabeth, at the end of our conversation last week, what does power do to people? What do people do with power? If we could just let that question fall into us and see, where does it land? How does it land? What images or memories, thoughts come up? What feelings and where do they arise? If there's a little story in particular that comes to mind, could each one of us hold that? Maybe even step into it a bit. What does power do to people? What do people do with power? Power. you. And I have a beautiful old bell from Thailand, which I'll just ring. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it that we could have that moment of reflection. I'm tempted to ask you and Annette if something came up that you're burning to share, or if you would like me to first share a little bit what's in me with that question.
I muted myself so I wouldn't have distraction. I'm very glad that you started that way, because I feel that power gets to be something so abstract for us, and we don't realize that it actually is an experience, as well as positional power or state power, or that there's something else to it that is actually very human and very much a part of who we are. Power is a very positive word for me. It relates to some of my most favorite words, like potential and possibility. All of these words come from the same root, and it's about it's about our ability to make things happen. So I'm very glad that we had a chance to embody this first before speaking about it, perhaps more abstractly, but maybe not.
Thank you.
Yeah, me too. I can just say that I'm actually burning to hear more from your side, very much. And it's been a very good entry, because it's really coming from sinking into a much deeper place than only my headspace, to actually connect a lot better with what we're going to talk about. So thank you. And it's lovely that you bring already that stage feeling to our dialogue. This is really, really good, performative, and all senses including. Thank you.
I love that. And what I love about it is, and we'll talk later about the theater of transformation, is that it's not the stage out there, but it's the stage in here, right? Us, which you use the beautiful word, Elizabeth, already about embodying, that how are we actually inhabiting, power, so that it's something that is positive, and it's about potential and possibility, as you said. And then how do we step on the stage, Annette, that you evoked, so that the way in which we engage as this embodiment out there can be one. We can give power the meaning we want, rather than being, marionettes, like that are acted upon or given the script that we have to just perform. So I love that. So for me, I recognize that it only fell into me maybe a year ago now, realizing how much power, and all of the different ways that already the two of you have referred to it, how much power has been at the central quest, in a way, that I've had, In the first instance, very much like you said it as you started sharing, Elizabeth, that it's something that seems imposed upon us. So we think immediately of political power, economic power, military power. Then, of course, how in English and many languages, power is also the word we use for energy, right? So like nuclear power, what is it? Is it going to be clean power, or clean energy, or dirty energy? So those kinds of power. But of course, also, which will be the topic with Annette and you, for the One World Bearing Witness, a ritual that we will offer, which is it going to be the power of love? Power. Which of these is it going to be? In India, it was very much me being at the receiving end of seeing how the power that is done to us by politics, by economics, by the powers that be, can be so different, and how we can feel that there's so little possibility, to use your word, to do anything about it. And I guess what I got fascinated about is, how does one journey? so that one can transform that, so that instead of having the power act upon you where you become powerless, right? And so much of our work and so many of the people you're inviting to One World Bearing Witness are those who are, trying to change that dynamic of going from, working with the powerless against the powerful. When does that shift to that positive notion that you had, where actually power is something exciting because it gives us a sense of agency and creative agency and potential and creative potential to do something with it? So those are the kinds of things that, as my work has been in the area of conflict, and especially, how do you go about rebuilding peace and restoring justice after the worst kinds of conflict, beginning with what happened in the middle of Europe, in the Second World War, and mostly dealing with contemporary conflicts. So it's a lot about people who feel powerless because the economic, political, and military structure is all stacked up against them and they are hapless victims. And yet it was in the midst of that that I began to discover the flip side of, yes, what does power do to people? And when I, like, the leitmotif of what do people do with power is, on the one hand, the stories we are familiar with, the person who acquires power and we believe they're going to be a positive force for change because they inspired so much hope in people when they first entered the political or the economic or the military arena. And what we believe and we are conditioned to believe and we are taught is that power corrupts and corrupts absolutely. But what I've witnessed is actually so many people at that turning point who actually turn the key and find the way for the power to become intrinsic, inner power, spiritual power, the power of consciousness, the power of greater realization. And then that becomes, just like you put it already in a few words, it becomes the power of possibility. It becomes the power of creativity, and it becomes literally the power of transformation, not just for themselves, but for their societies. So I'm hoping that already our dialogue today could be a bit of an exploration of how this is for all of us and how could that become something more widespread.
I think that's a great and very really provocative and exciting beginning. I mean, when I was thinking about these questions, I thought about a lot about my own experience. And what's interesting is looking at kind of the intersection of personal power, or the personal sense of possibility, and status hierarchy, or because part of what that sense of I can do this, I have possibility, there's a part of what that creates, particularly I think in the world that we're given, that is so individualistic and so forth, is that my experience is that it also creates a kind of invulnerability often. And that one of the things that I think power does to people, if you're the teacher or the leader, it's very easy to become disconnected from the consequences of your actions. To realize you don't see yourself as others see you. And this sort of follows on a conversation we had in the Global Dialogue Lab with another woman who will be appearing in One World Bearing Witness, Rose Saki Milligan, where she was talking about dominance and the subordinate. And I could tell from my own experience as a white woman that in woman terms, looking at the world that as it is often, and spaces that often have been defined by men, that my awareness of power differential is very different than when I am, for example, in a group of women and I am given status or power in that, like a hierarchical position. I'm much less aware of what I am doing and the implications of my actions, because there's a blindingness that power can give one in that kind, or a blindedness that power can give one in that position of hierarchy. One has to work actually quite hard to even to get people to tell you, what do they see? What can I improve? What, is this something that is working for all of us? Because so it's a very interesting thing. It is the thing that makes it possible, and yet it is also, when one is in a position of power, and not even necessarily aggressive power over, it's often hard to see clearly what it is, what the effect of what one is doing is, and that's something that I feel, it's something that I think any leader needs to know, because it's a very important realization. It can be quite humbling. I mean, when you hear someone say something about you as a leader, for example, where they see a habit of yours or something you didn't even really pay attention to, and it has an impact on people. Like the other day I teased or a couple of weeks ago, I teased one of the young women who are working with us, because I tease often, but it in a cultural dynamic, it can often not work. And then I'm the boss. But so it's a, and then it's like, whoa, I don't want to do that. But it can be things that are so casual on the part of the person in power, that are not meant, or not supposedly meant, but they are an enactment of the fact that one doesn't have to be, that one can exercise, or do things in a space in which one has power, that the person who is subordinate would never think of doing. And it's very humbling to really try to stay present to that as someone who is in a position of power, or someone who is very self-actualized and able to be powerful, to realize that also has an impact on people. But I don't mean in a paranoid way, like, oh my God, I can't do anything. But there is some way of being, bringing the experience of subordination into a use as someone who is in power, to be able to understand and have empathy for, and to create different kinds of spaces. It seems to be really important.
I mean, I wonder whether this real involution of power, where it's almost like the revolution that happens. And I was sure I was going to share the story at some point, but I thought maybe later on. When we really go through that discovery of, not power over, which is what we've grown up with hierarchies, and even those, as you were saying, of us who are much more conscious and try, even within the relative positions of power we have, to create more inclusive, more circular, more less domination, subordination kinds of environments. Even then, it seems that there's a flip that happens at a certain point, where power exudes out of us rather than needing to be exerted from us.
Mm.
In those cases, I think about so many of the people, and again, I'm still in the search for another word which could replace leader,
Mm-hmm.
So many, just like power, like you said, it's such a beautiful word, and yet so many of our associations with it are about dominance kind of power. And likewise with leadership, which should be this wonderful thing of, how can I lead myself and lead others to their best potential, has become rather this dominant kind of relationship. But the kinds of people that I come across and work with, who I feel come to this place of transformation, it feels like that doesn't happen. And maybe part of it is because often I see that there's this capacity to laugh at yourself. I think it's a little element that you and Annette also try to bring into your work and into One World Bearing Witness. It's like, as long as I take myself very seriously and believe I have power and there's a certain persona that I need to, exert and at all times uphold, right? Everything is going to be perceived in that way. But actually, when that's burst open,
Mm-hmm.
actually the only power flowing through is more like a positive energy. then it seems like that doesn't happen, because more often you're the one being laughed at rather than one, laughing at or teasing others. Or there's something of that nature, and I think it's something that we often say, right? It feels like those come to another level of consciousness. There's always a sense of lightness, not taking one's power so seriously, because you realize it's actually just given. You acquired it or deserved it. I need to preserve it. Yes, deserving and preserving are out. And they're two very, very different stories coming up to me, and we'll see if I get a chance to throw them in. One is a biological one, which just arose, which was my turning point with power. When I got it, I didn't yet embody it, but at least I conceptually got it. And the other one is actually a story from the slums of my country, in the city I grew up in Mumbai, where I saw it and I felt it, and my big aha moment. That's what I've been looking for, and
I would like to bring in a little switch, because I'm realizing how much the English connotation of power is incredibly different to the German. Or let's say it means two very different things in German, and that we have two words for. And this is what I would like to bring in. I don't know how many cultural backgrounds we have here together in this space. Maybe you would like to share how that is in your mother tongue, Rama, in a bit. Yeah. But I can say that when we talk about power here it can mean in German a very structural power, like meaning maybe I don't really translate it right, but like a mighty position, right? Like a structural power that is definitely a more dominant position. But it can also mean, and this would be the German word Macht, and Macht is something that is incredibly, it is incredibly overshadowed by so many scars, by so much negative connotation. It's almost as if it's only used in the political realm, but also it's only used in when you want to express that somebody is a bit abusive of his or her position. And so it's not a neutral word at all. It's very loaded, very charged. And the other thing is, and this is where I sense there is your inspiration coming, Rama, is that power in German can also mean Kraft, meaning there is a certain expressional power, right? And this is definitely a very interesting realm, and this is, maybe I'm wrong, but this is where I sense you're coming from at the moment, to find an access point to shift the relationship that we have with power, that might be a subordinate position in whichever cultural context we might be in, to shift it to an active position. And in both ways, I would be interested to hear more from your side.
One of the things that I'm quite passionate about, because you brought up words, and I'm so glad you did, because every word is so culturally, historically, personally, it's like it's a living thing, I mean, that's why I guess it was sound and words that made the universe. Gosh, I do, speaking of the universe, have to show you the colors outside my window for everyone. Look at that sunset. Can you see those colors?
Wow.
There is a bigger power out there. That's
yeah, exactly.
A craft, isn't it? Which is that so many words have been, in a sense, taken from us and have been loaded with such negative connotation due to historical, political, and cultural factors or abuse, right? And some of them I feel that now is a time for us to reclaim them,
Mm.
to rename them, to reimagine them, to not to distance ourselves and say, well, that's just the way it is, and there's no other way to conceive of them. Some words perhaps have so become hollowed out or overburdened that there is no possibility of reclaiming, reimagining them. So with them, we may have to say, may you, with all the pain that you carry, at some point simply dissolve, and maybe you know what I mean? And other words will emerge. But I do feel with some words, and it would be great that we also consider re-empowering them, literally, you know? And I feel that definitely with the English word power, for exactly the dichotomous way in which already, Elizabeth, you described it, you know, the power that is done to us. So the Macht as well as the craft. So how can we imbue that with more craft and less Macht? But in languages where there are two terms, you know, a little bit like force maybe in English, but of course force is not so, you know, is force more like Macht? I'm thinking a little bit.
Yeah,
Yes, question
yeah.
I've put, you know, that can we really, because there's so many words like this which have been completely hollowed out or overburdened.
Well, it's interesting because in times of, if you look at language, and you at times of culture, of big cultural transformation, words will shift their meaning. If you, I mean, I used to love exploring the Oxford English Dictionary and the first use of the word, like a word like courage, which we think we know what it means, mut, right? Is it comes into English from the French cour, heart, courage, that meant originally to speak one's, to speak one's mind with all one's heart, which is different from what we think of what courage is. But you know, at a you the shift in words is often related to different streams that become available to us, or as you say, become tainted. You know, the word noble, to be noble. I mean, that was a class marker at one point, but then it becomes an attribute that a human being can have. I mean, so it's interesting. And I feel that with so many of these words that are big words, because they're important. They're important things. Power is important, and we need to pay attention to it. That we need to be. We need to give them new life or different life in some way, or not, or allow those who have been subordinated to claim them, and make something new with them.
Yes. And to respond to the other part of your question, Annette, because you wanted to ask me what is it in my language, and taking Hindi, which is kind of, I guess, the more common language across India. The word Shakti, I'm trying to think, is there another word? I mean, there's a word takat, which may be more like strength, you know, so maybe more like force or like, but Shakti, which is fantastic, and many of you may have heard of it, because that is kind of all so the word itself simply means energy, but it also means, Shakti also means strength or power. And at the same time, Shakti is the female divine energy, so the female goddess, you could say, the female principle, the feminine, the divine feminine, that is responsible for the creation of the world. So in a sense, it's totally marked and craft together. Now, what's interesting is, like in English, Shakti is also used for electrical energy and nuclear energy, and so, you know, so it is this composite word. And unless we really reflect upon it, you know, you can completely forget that the most ancient and still very present and living reference to the word is the divine feminine.
Mm-hmm.
So you have all these different female deities that represent, wisdom and love and well-being and good fortune and power. But Shakti is like all of that put into one, without which the universe cannot come into being.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lovely thing. So again, in that case, it would be lovely to go back to that origin, to recognize it's still present, to recognize that Shakti is only Shakti because she's no little demure little female, with a veil. She is the Durga power. She is the devouring as much as the nurturing mother. She is Mother Nature.
Kali.
Exactly. She is the Kali, without which the universe itself would be destroyed, because negative power, and that's also, I guess, the beauty with Indian mythology, like with every single mythology, the Native American, the African, the all over the world, is it's all about this question: when we as human beings come to this planet, do we seek inner power, to become what the Africans would call, real human beings? Do we seek Ubuntu?
Mm-hmm.
And actually, just yesterday, was it yesterday or the day before now? I was teaching my course, which is on transformative justice, restoring justice after genocides, mass atrocities. And I asked all the different Africans from Kenya, from Zimbabwe, from Uganda, from Ethiopia, who were in that group, to say, what is that word in your language? And the beauty in their languages, the word human, the I and the we, you can't separate. Human and humanity cannot be separated. Whereas in our language, in English at least, human seems to only refer to the individual who is the subject of human rights. And humanity is this soft concept that's out there, but actually of seeing them together. And so to come back to the point I was trying to make, it's that on this journey in human life, do we seek to develop our humanity, our inner power, so that we may be of service and do good to others while feeling deeply satisfied and fulfilled in so doing? Or do we seek to dominate others and use the power over others? So how can we come back to this place where we recognize that the two are the flip sides, and how can we integrate them? So I think it also relates back, Elizabeth, to what you were saying, which is so critical, right? That it's not just in political arenas, but even in the world of, of spiritual teaching, that one could have a person who has acquired power through all the right means, the inner power, and then forgets to continue integrating the shadows. Noticing the shadows, let alone integrating them. And that's when you get into the kind of situation you were describing, so that fascinates me of this, that actually discovering and revealing your inner power, the craft, may require a constant ability to recognize, see, and be willing to integrate all the little negative things that could still come along your way, even if you believe you are a very wise or enlightened or experienced or powerful person.
Yeah, there are two things that come up for me that kind of take in different directions, and it's that one, just to note that that part of what I think, the fact that in English and in the West there is not a root positive source of feminine power, I think is something that is really important to know. And just for, that there isn't an goddess, there isn't that energy is considered masculine. Agency is considered masculine. The feminine is the passive, the receptive, all of which is beautiful. But that creative energy, that it is not there. So I mean, I think that's very, very important. What's interesting is that I think even from a felt sense of power, for it not to become brittle, for it not to become this kind of wall of self-image that one ends up investing in. You know, because you as you said, you work with people who gave their people hope, gave them a sense that there was something possible. I mean, I remember seeing a beautiful congresswoman from the 60s. She was just so alive and such a such a powerhouse. And 20 years on, I met her for something, and her hair was sprayed into a kind of like helmet, and she was just this figure. And who she was as a person was like, where are you? Are you still in there? But I think that there's something about, I think also particularly for women, the kind of exposedness of power that is something that's very delicate. That I mean, who what's his? He wrote leadership. He teaches leadership at the Kennedy School of Government. I'm blanking on his name. But talking about when men are in positions of power, they tend to see the attention towards themselves as a very positive thing, and often as an erotic thing, which is why so many male leaders get caught with their pants down, literally. But that women standing before a crowd and exciting the crowd, that gaze is felt in a very different way. And so how do you withstand that gaze, trust? How do you create pathway or ways to continue to have access to one's own and one's own deeper energy, and the energy that is connected to to life itself? How do you maintain that kind of connection and the vulnerability that really requires? That requires that we are naked with being, and being naked with being brings up almost immediately not being, particularly in a woman's body. So it's a very very interesting place that I think that there's some way that to be ultimately powerful as a person, one needs to be deeply comfortable with a kind of vulnerability that is just a very deep kind of vulnerability.
You know who I was just speaking to an hour ago before this call, or maybe a little bit more now, an hour and a half ago, was the one who comes to mind as you just said these things, the vulnerability and how do we deal with being in the public eye. She's a political leader in Palestine, where we are heading in a few weeks. And I would love to just share, because she deals with so many of these questions, and what she sort of says, I just put on my Palestinian scarf for that, is her name is Zahira Kamal. And what she talks about is, she says, what is it? Because if you look at her, she just turned 71 this year. And she still has this face of this young woman, and bursts into laughter. And so I don't know if I even have glasses here. I hadn't expected Zahira to come up today, but I did just speak to her. And what she would say, because I'm not going into at all the political context of the Middle East, because that'll take us in a totally different place, but just about how do women in this position deal with the power, right? And so Zahira, who was born in East Jerusalem and is now 71, and is the first woman Secretary General of a political party, the first woman Minister of Women's Affairs when the Palestinian Authority was created. And she said, to be a leader, you must be able to look into the mirror every day. You must be able to see your flaws and ask yourself, can I correct them in myself? Am I doing the things that I do not want my enemies to do to me? I cannot look in the mirror one day. I cannot go out there to my people, because I get my power from the people. Only when I'm surrounded with the people and I can feel that they really trust me, that I can be a leader. And she's a leader who in her party has, it's of course a socialist party and so on, and very feminist. But it's when she says, when I became the Minister of Women's Affairs, for the first few years, I worked and I organized everything, because we never had a ministry before, and I set up all the departments, and I brought in all the women leaders to advise us, and I brought in the men and the imams and the mullahs to talk to us, to explain their problems, and I talked to all the academics and so on. But once I'd set it all up, I brought one of the younger women from our party, and I said, you need to be the minister. Because if we are not willing to step down from power and to share the power and to empower our younger people, how will we ever build the kind of country that we want? And I can go on and on with all kinds of her stories about it, but it's that, so is meaning in every instance alive. And with all, when you're in a situation like Palestine, where there is there's 17 crises every day, and in a position of such responsibility, you have, and every, if you're traveling with her, every checkpoint, she will be chit-chatting with the guy who's selling the little fruits, or dealing with everyone of whatever station with such openness and humility and love and laughter, and I feel that that's part of what that could be. Whether it's for women or men.
Yeah, that is a very, very beautiful imagination. And I just would want to bring back into the loop something that I thought before in one of the first things you were saying, as Elizabeth was saying, about the position of the dominant and the subordinate, and how much we need to ask ourselves and to work on losing that blindedness, or just polishing those mirrors, or polishing that window in ourselves in which we can see clearer on those positions. I would just love to bring back that I also think it's not only empathy with the subordinate people or cultures or structural positions, when we are all, it's very different. Of course, I'm also white, but we are all in a way dealing with probably many different positions in our lives. So we travel through them, but it's not only about the empathy with the subordinate position. I think it's a lot about the empathy also with the dominant position. And this is what I hear when I hear you talking. That I find that might be an access point to actually come closer to what power, or that reimagining of power you're talking about, might be about, or can be about, for myself or for us.
Utterly so. And I find, definitely in my work, I find, of course, this approach speaks so powerfully to the powerless. Giving them, it's inviting them not just to share their story as it is, but also to engage in, the awakening or the reawakening of possibility, and stepping into and articulating your vision, and knowing or beginning to believe that it may be possible for you to actually live and embody that vision, right? But what I find is actually it's those who are in positions of dominance are the most deeply touched, because it's almost as if, what you talked about, polishing the mirror, that for so long no one was showing them a mirror. And here it's in the first instance, they're hearing a story of someone else, but they go, oh, that could be. Then it's reawakening this thing in them that may have fallen asleep, because there wasn't anyone shining the mirror. There wasn't anyone who had the courage, the courage, to speak truths to power and really speak from their heart and say, you seem to be losing your way. And so I utterly feel, and I find that that's almost the most attractive and potent way one could go about this, is to enable those in power to rediscover themselves, and to rediscover how much more joy, satisfaction, well-being we can get from, taking that back in there and being able to re-become human in a way, from within. Some who, I mean, I have like different stories amongst the people that I work with of people who have gone through that transformation, but it's for sure that that's my greatest desire, to work with such people. And those are the most fascinating stories. And look at our, if you look at our history and mythologies, those are the stories that touch people the most, the ones of what was it, the Saul who becomes, Paul in the Bible, or the Angulimala who's killed all these people and wears the necklace of people's, chopped off fingers, who becomes the greatest devotee of the Buddha and a great, a spiritual teacher. So there's a reason why all of our stories are full of the potential to transform the perpetrator, the dominator, the tyrant. And it's definitely a key objective of my work, I would say.
I find that it's really quite extraordinary. I think that's part of what seems to be quite unique about your work. That through the lightness and embodiment of story, that you create a space in which those who have gotten to a point where they no longer have a reflection, no longer are getting a reflection back because people are afraid to give it, people, rightly or wrongly, I know that a lot of leaders find themselves crushed when they find out that people who have worked for them, didn't trust enough to say what they saw or thought, that they feel incredibly hurt by that fact, that the positional power or casual things that they did or things that they weren't aware of ended up creating this blackout room that is where they're living, and therefore not being in the stream of human relatedness. And but I think it's important for us to know that is a vulnerability of leadership, as you're saying, Annette. That's part of what happens with power, and also that this, I think, extraordinary way that you're working with stories to very subtly but directly saying, hey, look, this is the experience of people who are living in your regime, or living in your culture, or living in your city, or living in your tribe are experiencing, and this is what they're saying, in a way that is playful enough but serious enough, and a step removed enough that something can crack, or something can be heard. It sounds like that's very much the intent behind what you're doing.
Yeah, you expressed it beautifully. Absolutely. And then to create and hold that space, so that after they've had that kind of aha awakening moment, they actually have a safe space where they can take the first tentative steps, to embody that and be able to return to their workplace with that place that they can then apply in their daily lives.
What do you do? Can you say more about what you do there, or how that works?
I mean, what's come out, and it's wonderful actually, because the way it came about, here I am, I'd worked so hard, both as a scholar, as a practitioner, as a policy, advocate, and so on all of these issues. And I was so passionate about transformation, but I really feel it was like my body needed to experience that. And that was something that, I was so out of body in the first many years of my life, as many of us are, because it's all happening in here. But as I started doing this, and it kind of fell into me by accident, I had no clue. I have no background in theater, so what I do is not official theater like people who do theater. I had no clue how passionate I was about people's stories. But it started in December 2013 when I started actually enacting stories in the first person. I am Annette, I am Elizabeth, and highlighting in that short enactment, which often lasts 2 to 4 minutes, what was the turning point? Was it a slow process? Was it a boom? Very often it was when outer power had completely crushed you, and nothing seemed possible anymore for whatever reason. You know, you may be the perpetrator and you've just killed so many people that there's no possibility than continuing to do the same, because how can you possibly redeem yourself? Or you've lost so much that there's no hope, you know, whichever, or anything. And, or you're a bystander and you figure, what's that got to do with me? What difference could I make? You know, completely powerless in the sense of not being affected by. So when I started enacting so many stories from so many different cultures, ages, men and women, you know, and often going back and forth across the genders, it was like my body began to recognize that there was, and I remember in early days when people would say, oh, is there a methodology? And I'd say, methodology, I don't know. But I realized that there is actually a process. And it seems to be that, so that, you know, there is this moment, whatever happens, so like there's almost like a knock on your door, something comes calling, and there's the moment that suddenly you recognize, however hopeless it seems, however you know, there seem to be no options. I have to take a position of responsibility and step forward, right? And whether that's the warlord who says, no, I'm going to have to come out there and say, I'm sorry. You know, I'm going to have to change the otherwise what seems like, you know, this beaten path. And the moment that happens, it feels like the moment that people actually take that position, what you described in the beginning, Elizabeth, like the possibilities begin to open, so that the witnessing reality in a new way. It's reality, 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 but the moment you become a witness to it and take a stand, the second step starts, which is the awakened possibility. And that's where the words that you used, Annette, you know, that suddenly it's as if you rediscover your human potential. You're not, you know, condemned to repeat and repeat what's happened ad nauseum since the beginning of history. And with that, your creative potential opens. You know, you can kind of see, smell, hear, taste new options that didn't seem possible when it seemed like this was the only track that there was. And then it seems that from this new space of potential, the new vision arises. And that's where I feel it's so resonant, Elizabeth, with what you were saying, that, you know, so many people say, oh, I found the vision, boom, they go. And because we've been trained to believe that, you know, when you come up with your vision and your business plan or your personal plan, it's supposed to be something almost unreachable and out there. But the whole thing is, that's why we lose sight. We stop having the mirror. We stop having people reflect to us. We stop doing the inner work, because actually what it needs is envisioning change. The vision which may be out there, what are we going to do to pull it into us? How are we going to literally use it to polish our own inner being? That we actually become one with the vision. We are the vision. We are an embodied being. And then it means that we are literally at every moment looking in the mirror, and every person we see becomes the mirror. You know, literally, you know, everyone, the strange, everything, you know, probably every tree and so on. And then that becomes, I believe, this inner power that just attracts the allies and resources. And so it's like a two-way street. You know, you are magnetizing because you're radiating this power, and at the same time, things around you are literally shifting because the frequency has shifted. And that literally is what I see in every single case, in every society, every organization, but every individual at the center of that, is that's the process that's happened from being a powerless victim of outer power, or maybe they did it to themselves, you know, but it can also happen, to actually becoming sources that radiate power. And always when that happens, it has a huge ripple effect around them. And so what I do is, in every session, whether it's, you know, whatever the time frame is, to ensure that people within the time frame of the session, whether it's a semester-long course or just an hour's workshop or an hour's dialogue like we have now, which is coming to an end, is, can people experience that? Can they take it into their lives? And can they begin to see how they themselves could either strengthen the journey they're already on, the inner power they already have, or begin to shift the outer to the inner power? So really take agency and rescript and reenact what their own lives and thereby their societies could be.
Great. That's fascinating. That's really, we could spend, I think, a whole day just on days, weeks on that. It's very, very interesting. I think we should open up to our co-participants here who have been blacked out. So if you want to turn on your camera, join us. And it's a very small group tonight, but hello, Josh. Welcome. Isabella, Peter, Susan, and we should have a couple more. I can ask them to turn their cameras on.
Perhaps, Elizabeth, you can turn the camera of Gila on.
Yeah, I just invited her.
Close it.
Okay, I invited her to turn her camera on.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if she can. Okay, let's see. I can. Oh. There she is. Okay, great. Right. So, let's come together right now and let's make a little space as we've just come together. And okay, getting a message from the next someone else who's on said he or she will start their video later. But let's just breathe a little bit together. And make the space now whole with all of us here. Come all together. And realize that in you've been watching and the conversation that Rama, Annette, and I have had, and let's just open this space to include all of us with a moment of silence and reckoning that here we are in these different places and holding a space together. And what we would love to do now for about the next half hour is to continue a conversation all together. And in that, what I'm suggesting is that we let's pick up on the thread that we were on, which was about the process of transformation from being a source of domination, perhaps, or power being done to oneself, to a sense of power that actually creates a space of possibility and new possibility for those around us, and in that. What I invite us to do is to try to follow that thread, to respond by contributing your response to what Rama was just saying, and let's weave something together as a whole.
Elizabeth, would it be possible to ask everyone, just so we could hear everyone's voices briefly, to share a couple of words of if something came up in the initial reflection or contemplation of the word power and the question of today? And that would just be a lovely way to just presence all of you together.
That's great. We're small enough that we can do that tonight.
Mm.
Maybe I start. Oh, you start, Sibyl.
When I hear the word power, it's really what Annette said, it's this Macht. And I felt a lot of fear inside of me. And then you said, perhaps change to this good power. And this bad power is comes up, and this good power is from above. I felt like this, and this good power it warms, and this bad power it gives fear, and you shrunk, and it's cold, and for me it's hard to look to the good way of power. It's Kraft. It's a better word. I have to say Kraft strengthen me. Because it's also the history of Germany, this Macht. And this is really, it weakens a lot.
Yeah, very important.
You're muted, Gil. Here, I'll unmute you. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, and I think it's the history between man and woman, the power, and the both perspective. I know the power as a body power, but for me, it's very difficult to change it in the power to realize things. I want to learn to give this power space, and to look friendly in every person, for every person. Yes, and the bigger view.
Thank you.
Yes. To me, I saw in the beginning that I see power only outside myself. So I was surprised, not connected with myself. So I see it always, and I felt that something is wrong with that. But maybe this is also the German pattern to not to really face it in myself, but putting it outside, seeing it outside only, and I don't want to touch it. I think this, because you can burn your fingers, or your hand can get dirty, something like this, and so not touching it at all. But I was very inspired how he spoke about it, and that's a real creative force, and you can see in a complete different way. I loved it a lot. Thanks.
Thank you.
For me, of course, there's the usual power is, I'm afraid of it. There's fear that comes up. But as this conversation went on, and just now the word came into my mind, empower, and then it becomes a balancing act, because what draws me out of this fear is love, and I want to empower those that I love, and I'm willing to face the fear, but it's a balancing act. It's like learning how to.
Thank you. Yeah, Josh.
Hi, everybody. The feeling and that came over me in our first reflection kind of took expression in two words: chimeric illusion.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, Dr. Mani, you gave us a nice little tour outside your window, and you said, there's a bigger power out there. You know, in light of eternity, all of this is going to be obliterated, totally obliterated. So just the idea at all that we have agency over ourselves, over anything that's transpiring, and anything other than a very limited, and indeed that's very important to all of us in our embodied life. But in some bigger perspective, the idea of power is like a tremendous folly and illusion, totally. So I guess that was my first kind of reaction, what I felt. And as the conversation unfolds, I'll share a little bit more about where that went as I was listening to this discussion around the corrupting aspects of power and the domination paradigm. But it all kind of came out from that feeling of like, power? What?
He's muted. He's muted, Elizabeth.
No, you're okay. We can hear you, Sibylla.
No, Josh is muted.
Yeah, he just
Yeah,
muted
I just muted myself after speaking. Yeah.
Is the person who says Dio, okay, is that, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think that what it is that we think power is has something to do with whether or not it is something or not.
Well, what really struck me thank you. That was beautiful to hear each one of you. And I really felt each of you very deeply. And what really struck me, Josh, in your lovely comment was the power over. You know, when we think power is this thing out there, whether it's economic, material, physical, political, etc., that is chimeric and an illusion. And if only we could recognize how illusory it is. What I experience with people who exude this power is that then they kind of become like in the flow of this larger power. It's then they can exude that and then they move on. It's not a big deal. Then they're gone. And it's like they recognize that, I'm just a carrier for something bigger that happens through me. And it was so powerful, Susan, when you talked about it's the stepping into the fear, right? Because most people don't discover that because the fear or whatever those other emotions are keep us from going there. And once we go there, we have your fantastic aha moment, of, let me laugh at it because now it's sort of dissolved into me. And then we just become a conduit again. And we can let power pass through us and radiate out of us and then disappear. And it's not a big deal. That's the great part of it. And that, yeah. So I love that was part of what the reflections brought up for me. Thank you. And it's definitely a story I have to share before.
Go ahead.
But after a while. Or should I do it? Should I do it now?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll probably be doing some version of it at the One World Bearing Witness. But since we are such a small group, I think it's like a prelude. And I was mentioning earlier in the conversation that my two big moments of this whole lifelong quest about what is this thing called power and how does one have that shift that, that all of you describe. I would love to share the two stories with you, and I'll see if I can. One is from Indian mythology, which was a story that I didn't grow up with, and I discovered that was in 2003, right at the beginning of the Iraq War, and I was just saying, how can this be? How can we be doing what we are doing? There must another way, and I discovered this mythological story, which I'll come to. But my real recognition of the kind of themes we were talking about came about in the slums of Mumbai. And I grew up in Mumbai, which was called Bombay then. I even have a bimbi somewhere, so let me put it on. Okay, there we go. We have now been transformed. Namaste. We are the women of the slums of Mumbai. For many years, we had no power. Our husbands, they were raping us, abusing us. We would be working hard all day. They would steal our money and drink alcohol and then come back and beat us. But what could we do? But one day, we realized that what happens to someone else affects all of us. That day we decided to organize ourselves. We organized a march, 300 women from the slums, and we marched to the police station and we said, when a woman gets raped, you must follow and you must prosecute the rapist. The police listened to us. That gave us a lot of courage. From that day on, we began to meet in a circle in one of our homes. We would just share with each other our stories, all the things that happened to us. Before that, we were too ashamed to tell each other what has happened to us. But we found that just by listening to each other and sharing our stories, we found that our real power lies inside ourselves. Then we realized, alone, there is not much we can do, but together, there is a lot we can do. That is how we got the idea one day to organize the Action Task Force. You see what we would do? We all had cell phones. Even in the middle of the night, if any woman was being raped or beaten, we would call each other and we would appear on the spot. We would even take our pots and pans in case we had to beat the man to make him stop beating his wife. If he wouldn't stop, some of us would go to the police station and wake up the police and tell them to come to do their job. After that, we had another idea. You see, it is not enough to just stop the man and woman from fighting. How can we transform these men? So we women, we trained to become counselors. We would sit together with the husband and wife and talk to them until they found a solution. Many of our men have changed in this way. Some of them will never change. Then we would tell them, leave your wife in peace and go somewhere else. That is sometimes better. Then we did it. We can change not just our community, but our whole society. So we created a policy forum. We invite the shopkeepers who are always cheating us because we are uneducated. We invited the politicians and parliamentarians. We invited the old and the young people. And together, we discussed like this to find a common solution for our problems. You see now, our young women are coming up with policy papers and we are submitting it to the government. And even the government is listening to our policy ideas. That is how we discovered. When you find your power inside yourself and your power with each other, then you find the power to change anything in the whole world. That is our message. Namaste.
That was awesome.
They're very close partners and I meet with them regularly and endless inspiration.
Wonderful. Really wonderful. I mean, part of what I see you also doing, Rama, is you're documenting these incredible stories and tales of transformation, or these ways that communities are responding around the world. And I mean, I think one of the big hopes of global dialogue is that hearing stories across in different contexts, then it's like, oh, we could do that too. I know that there's now a global slum dwellers association where they're meeting together. Women, mostly women who live in these slums, are meeting together and learning from each other how to make life better for themselves and their children. And it's someone in the slums of Buenos Aires versus not versus, but with Mumbai and Hong Kong, and it's quite extraordinary, quite extraordinary. But to have a record of and also a record that is not just written in a policy format, but is given as a story that hits you, that touches you, is really important.
I think that goes even a bit further. This is what I would just like to salt and pepper in here. It's when you think back to your history lessons in school, did you ever learn about why things actually were decided in a particular way that shifted particular big that shifted particular big things in history? When you think back, I only read about in 18 something this was decided, in 18 that was decided. So you don't learn it with a story very often.
No process.
And exactly, there is no process acknowledged. And I find it or like very rarely you have it nowadays, much more in movies, and and this is how people can actually very often remember things. But then movies kind of embody history, which is also not exactly true. But what I would just say here, this is another interesting phenomenon. I find that it even happens in our culture, that we subordinate actually the process that leads to something very, very important, to a change. So we don't give as much value to a process as to the outcome. And where we don't, just judging by the way that we don't really talk about it much, or that we don't give it a big stage, and or we talk about it in the way that it becomes a myth or an urban legend or something like that.
Something too unbelievable or too amazing, something or other that could never happen again. Yeah. Because there only is process. That's actually, outcome is a part of process.
Exactly. And this is a little bit where I see also what you said, Josh, coming into here, because I would say I disagree with a few things that you're saying, but I think there is a reality to, yes, of course, because it's not so much about that we achieve things and there are outcomes, because it's not gonna stay. It's not eternal. Whatever we do, it's vain, right? But so in that way, it's an illusion. But my time, my being here in time and space is for me a very real experience, and and I do have the urge to create it. And okay, good, but this goes too far now. But I'm saying what I wanted to say is that it's interesting that we do subordinate the process, and at the same time, it's actually the only real thing, as you say, Elizabeth. And this is what it's the only real thing that actually happens. And yeah, so yeah.
If I could, I was reminded that, Peter, when you spoke, I was very deeply touched, when you said you realized that actually for you power is only out there, but not in here. It was kind of a bit of an echo to Susan. You put it very differently, where you said, well, I realized that I have fear of going into that. And there was this kind of image arising in me of, what would it be if we actually, connected with that? I mean, Sybil, you too, you talked about this with negativity and the coldness you felt with the word marked, and you needed to almost embody and feel the word craft, to connect with it. But what I was going to ask is, like, if every one of us, and maybe there's a little bit the process that Josh, you went through, is if each of us could think of an experience, so taking Annette's point about history is what happens to us. And if, your history will probably be told to your grandchildren as, Josh, born on X, died on whatever, sorry, Josh, in many, many years, right? But what was the dash in between, right? Which is what is lost. So if each of us could just think of one experience in our lives where you feel something that seemed impossible to do, or people told you it was impossible. It could be something as small as convincing your son or daughter not to do this to you, or convincing your big brother not to beat you up. But it could be something more significant, something you felt not just pride, but actually joy and fulfillment in. And just literally, if we took a moment to just allow that feeling to, like, permeate us, almost like recreate it, and see if that even, like, as we step into that, does the body almost take a different posture? What happens to the face? Is it a smile, a wink, a giggle? And just as it fills you, if you can feel, is there a particular place in your body that feels particularly alive with, wow, I really did that? Somehow I was a key factor in enabling that to happen. The process and the outcome and the effect it had on people. Where do you feel it? And maybe just put one of your hands on that spot, wherever you feel that. And for sure, both when you started, during the process, on that big outcome day, and after, there were the nagging, critical, negative voices. So maybe just while still being very connected to where you feel that sense of joy and fulfillment, just maybe put a hand somewhere where you feel those voices are coming from, that negativity. Yeah, just like if you could localize that. Where is it? Is it right here? Is it far out? And actually, if you could, like, as if you could hold that in your hand, those negative voices, and just, like, bury them somewhere so they can, like, become useful humus, fertilizer for something good. They're serving some purpose, but they're not really needed here. And if that's okay, it would be just lovely. And Elizabeth, I hope I haven't overstepped here, but to just share a little bit of what that experience was like of each of you, knowing that craft is actually inside you. Mm-hmm. And that the marked can actually be seen and localized and put in its place in a way, allowed to become something less destructive. Do we still have a couple of minutes, Elizabeth, for people to
possibly? I mean, we next would be to break into to allow the group to talk with themselves or talk amongst themselves and take this further. Maybe that would maybe that's a great place. Why don't we just grab some words? You want to do a little bit of popcorn? See what words come up.
Be great, Elizabeth. I may need to leave before we come back in.
We don't come back. We don't come back.
Oh, so that would be beautiful if I could hear a little bit. And
yeah,
great. That would be a great creation.
So is there a word to give, Rama, about your experience, about
even to show me where it was that your power was? Peter, did you feel it in you?
I felt it in the heart.
Mm.
Mm.
Oh, beautiful. And was there still outer power, or was it gone?
Mm. Yeah, there was outer power still.
and also an inner power?
And also an inner power, definitely. Mm.
There's like a, and it's in this area, it was like a feeling of space and freedom.
Susan, I love what you have in your background. It brings such a beautiful atmosphere to this space. Do you guys hear those birds? I think it's in your background, Susan. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the birds. They make it.
I mean the sounds, yeah. Mm.
Well, shall we break in, allow you to continue going more deeply into maybe this distinction between the place where you feel, what is this place that where you feel empowered or powerful, where you're potent, versus where this other comes from? What is that? Maybe to explore that in a group. See where you go. Do you have any other thoughts, Rama?
I would love, just for closure, to hear a word from Gisela, Sybil, and Josh. But whatever you know the flow best. But if it's possible to hear a word from them, that would be lovely. Before
you want to offer a word?
Or whatever
I could feel the same like Susan. It was open here, and when you said the other voices, it hurts like here on the shoulder, on my right shoulder, and my right ear was also hurted. And then I took it out and give it to the floor to clean the floor.
That's awesome.
I felt a good power in my body, and the place, it's a important place. My
throat.
It's the place there is a wall. A wall. There is a good power, but here is a wall. I don't want to put the power out of me. The power has a good place here in me, but here is a wall.
We should talk about that sometime, Gila.
I felt a flow between heart chakra and the Manipura. that will center. So this openness of flow between the two of them, which, you know, in reflecting on this challenge of moving past the domination paradigm when thinking of power, I think a lot of that, the heart of that, is about how you open the heart in the face of the inherent corrupting influence that hierarchical power, which is the source of the ill effects of so much our association of dominance and power comes not from intrinsic power, but from hierarchical power. And, you know, my feeling is that all of the same practices that generate that inherent power that is within all of us, which is about aligning with that flow of all that is and being sort of a conduit, those same practices also mitigate all of the inherent corrupting influences of hierarchical power. So that was sort of what I was feeling.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Our other friend dropped off, it looks like. Our invisible friend. Would you like to continue speaking for as long as you like? What do you think? Continue.
I find it so interesting. We are so less people. Perhaps we can be a group together. It's
yeah.
It's yes.
Yeah. I think all together.
That's my opinion.
Okay. Shall we say, well, enjoy your conversation, and feel free to write about it on Facebook. There was a beautiful post that someone put up after last session. So feel free to do that on our Global Dialogue Lab Facebook page. So thank you, Rama and Annette, for being with us.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Great. And here we go into the rooms.
Have a good conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.